for Transformative Peacemaking for Mennonite Church USA. Today, we have the writers, the awesome writing team of Defund the Police and Abolition curriculum here with us. This long anticipated curriculum was released the day before the verdict of Chauvin's trial was announced. Sadly, the release of this curriculum was very timely. Since the launching of the curriculum 10 days ago, about 2,200 people have engaged with the curriculum. And even today, over 550 people have signed up to register for this webinar, and some of us are joining us via Facebook Live. The topic of police abolition is not new, but the urgency for action to make this world a better and safe place for everyone has gained much momentum in the past several years. Executive Director of MCUSA, Glenn Guyton, rightly challenges Anabaptists to imagine a third way. He said, we need to transform our thinking concerning justice, mass incarceration, and how to live in harmony as a society. We as peacemakers need to think deeply about the intersection of our theology and our view of community policing. So I know about 75 minutes is not enough to cover and talk about the expansive landscape of abolition movement. But I want to begin today by asking our wonderful panelists to introduce yourselves. And more specifically, please share with us how you became involved in the abolition work. And if possible, also let us know how long you've been doing this work. And I'm going to ask Chantel, and then Ben, and then Chris and Melissa to introduce yourselves.
Cool. Thank you, Sue, for such a wonderful introduction and framing for our time together today. My name is Chantel. I use she, they pronouns. I was just really intrigued by this question of like, how long have you been involved? And I'm like, well, specifically knowing that the framing of abolition, probably about 2 years, I would say. And my introduction into the framing and the reality of the word abolition and the work of abolition really came through my relationship with prison abolitionists, mainly Chris, but also through my work as a movement chaplain and through my coaching practice and yeah, just practicing my faith really, just kept coming up against the question of like, there's gotta be more, there's gotta be more. And I feel like that really led me down the path of abolition.
I'm Ben Tapper. I am probably the newest member to abolition work here. I'd say it's been a little over a year that I've been intentionally and specifically focused and dedicated to doing abolition work, to thinking about it, writing about it, talking about it, and doing the work. You know, I've always been, not always, but I've been dedicated to social justice issues and the combination of justice and theology for a while now, but really honing on abolition as more than just a thought or a pipe dream. That's been pretty recent. And it's been, you know, largely getting to work with this wonderful team that has helped me deepen my knowledge and deepen the awareness, my own awareness around what abolition can look like, not even in our community, but even like holding those abolitionist principles and values in relationship. And so that's been a blessing.
Hi, I'm Chris. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Untitled Law Project and an explicitly abolitionist organizing, legal, and advocacy org in Philly. We were founded in 2014, and I would say I became an abolitionist in 2013. I was doing some anti-prison expansion organizing, and first learned about abolition, and I was like, yes, that's the thing. We don't want to put people in cages. And so, yeah.
Melissa Fleur-Vixler in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I got invited into the work of Southerners on New Ground 5 years ago in the Black Mamas bailout, raising money to free Black mamas from cages in Durham, North Carolina. And so that work has continued for me over the past 5 years, sort of expanding to the whole breadth of the prison industrial complex, pick abolition, and yeah, grateful to be with you all.
Thanks, Melissa. Well, before we get into the actual content of the curriculum, which is pretty self-explanatory, I think, on the website, we want to focus on like why. Help us to define, and before we even do that, before we even talk about the why abolition, help us to define what abolition is, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what that means, and people are using it in different ways. So if you guys can help us define what abolition is and why it's important for us to create this curriculum. Let's start with Ben, and then go Chantel, Melissa, and Chris.
Yeah, so I think, you could ask probably 5 different people in this work what abolition means, and you might get a few different answers. But I think what's important is not finding one specific set of words that defines it, but rather understanding the intention behind it and the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal of abolition is to create a society in which public safety functions as a means to achieve safety and care for all people, and not just a select few. We have to understand that the way that public safety has functioned through policing in this country since its inception really hasn't done that. It's caused a lot of harm. It's caused deaths, brought fear into communities, broken up families. And so this call for abolition isn't exclusively about targeting a specific vocation. It's about recognizing the way an entire system functions to instill fear and to degrade the humanity of large segments of our population, and asking, what if it didn't have to be that way? Actually demanding and knowing it doesn't have to be that way. And so when we talk about abolition, it's a call to reimagine what safety can look like, and a call to divest our resources from the structures that are causing harm. And so that means getting rid of police and replacing them with services that can meet the needs of the community. It means looking at the functions and the roles that police play in communities, and identifying other community-grown organizations, groups, people, and services that can meet those needs better, that can meet those needs in a manner that is safe, in a manner that is responsive to what the people in the community, the people on the ground actually desire and long for. And so, this takes place through the process of defunding. It takes place through the process of imagining other ways of being, imagining other ways to orient ourselves organizationally and systemically. And it's not necessarily an immediate process. I don't know anyone that is calling for abolition that expects us to eradicate every police officer tomorrow. It's more about recognizing that at some point we want to get to a society that is safe for everyone. And then engaging in the work to begin divesting resources and putting them into places that can create safer communities and communities of care and support. So I think it's just important in terms of framing to name all those things and to be thinking about alternatives to policing, so that we can live in communities that are actually safe and meeting the needs of the people that are in them.
Yeah. Sue, I think you're inviting me to talk about why we wrote the curriculum, right? Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Ben, for stoking our creative juices about what abolition means to us, or at least means to you and means to us collectively. I think the why write this curriculum, it was needed, looking out into the landscape of are there people of faith? Are there Christians? Are there Mennonites? Are there Anabaptists talking about abolition, and specifically police abolition? And I think came up with the answer no. And so we just knew this thing needed to exist. But also as you already mentioned, Sue, MCUSA was getting calls for we want resourcing, and we need ways for our houses of faith, which are often could be, and I think should be, places of discipleship and transformation, right? The place where we renew our minds, where we change our thinking, for this to be the place where we really wrestle with what does that mean for us to participate in a society built on white supremacy and domination that enforce those things through policing, specifically of Black and brown bodies, right? And we can't afford to be the silent in the land and stand on the sidelines. And so this curriculum really was written in a place of urgency, right? We had to really resist that, because every time we turn on the news, it's just one more violent reality being put before us, but really wanting to write something not just speaking to the urgency of the now, but kind of calling us to faithfulness as Mennonites, as abolitionists, as Mennonites, as Anabaptists, and as Christians and the people of faith in general. Like, we really wanted this curriculum to be out in the world so people would have a space and a way to grapple with what their faith had to say to the question and the call for defunding the police. So that's my take on why we wrote this curriculum.
Thanks, Chantel. And Melissa, if you could piggyback on what Chantel has been saying, what are some theological framework for us to understand why, this call to abolition work as people of faith? Can you give us some theological groundwork for that?
Yeah, I'm a pastor at Raleigh Mennonite Church, and this is very real for our congregation because we did an abolition study about a year ago, just after George Floyd was murdered, and we had some Christian resources, but not a lot, and none, again, as Chantel was saying, that came from our Anabaptist faith, from our Mennonite faith, and we do carry this conviction with us, proclaimed in Luke 4, that when Jesus says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon him, where he has been anointed to proclaim good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom from the prisoners, recovery of sight from the blind, to set the oppressed free. And for Mennonites, that has come through our theological tradition in our confession of faith, which says that that God's work is to save human beings and the world from death and destruction, and to overcome the forces of sin and evil. So actually, this is for those of us who are writing this curriculum from an Anabaptist biblical perspective, this is actually the positive vision of the world that is where Jesus Christ has reconciled all things to himself in the death of Jesus, in his death and resurrection, right? That actually creation is redeemed and is being redeemed through people. And as we know, as Anabaptists, one of the guiding passages for us has always been, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, in this strong sense of peacemaking. And it has been pretty consistent in the history of Anabaptism that we refuse to bear the sword or the gun for the state. And traditionally, there were two reasons for that. One was because being a part of doing violence for the state meant we had to give our allegiance to the state. But we've already given our allegiance in baptism to Jesus, and we can't serve two masters. And the second is that doing violence on behalf of the state required us to forfeit our belief that all people are sacred and made in the image of God. We do not kill people intentionally, and we discern the ways that we resist systems of death and destruction of this old order that Jesus has done away with. And this goes for us beyond sort of this personal conviction as Mennonites. I think what Chantel was saying about, right, we're no longer the quiet in the land, right? We went through this time where Black and brown Mennonites called us out of non-resistance and into active participation in the reign of God. And so that continues to be, again, our confession describes us as a city on a hill, demonstrating the weight of Christ. So this means that we don't simply refuse to take up state violence as Mennonites, but we also call the world to a new vision of what is possible. And we work with others who sometimes can teach our church how to follow Jesus better than perhaps we even know ourselves, and work together towards the reign of God, breaking its way into everything, into creation.
Amen. Yeah, Melissa's a preacher and she could preach another couple of hours or a couple of days on that. So thank you, Melissa, for giving us that foundation. But Chris, also there's this mythology of like, but what else, right? How can we live without the police? And so share us a little bit more about this mythology of policing and how that can harm us, or yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that one of the things about prison industrial complex abolition is that it is to a certain extent about absence, like abolition, like what are we trying to get rid of? But folks like Ruth Wilson Gilmore talk about abolition as presence, and what are the things that we need so that there's less harm, so that there's less need for a punitive system, for carceral systems. I think part of what we get with police, in addition to really abdicating any sort of duty to one another, to reduce violence, to intervene, to care for one another, is that we basically give all that power to the state. We give that power to the police. When we have conflict, when we see harm, the thing that we do is call the police, and like there's this other entity that's supposed to come in and take care of it for us. And like sort of the way I think about it is that it's not that the police do this job, to the extent that they do it, because there's like anything about police or about policing that is sacred. Like the only reason that they have the ability to do this job is because it's actually all of our duty to do this. And we are, essentially saying like, hey, no thanks. I think one of the things that we really get with policing is we stop imagining that there could be something else. We've had, policing as it exists, more or less like it is now for hundreds of years. I think if we didn't know about police, if we didn't know that this was what the system could look like, should look like, I think we could imagine something that's actually much different, much better, and that would actually reduce harm, and not just respond to instances of harm, sort of in the best case scenarios. There's also this thing about policing that's like, we see in places like in urban areas and cities where there is a lot of violence, we see this call, for more police oftentimes. And it's sort of I think it's really just like a smokescreen. And we look at huge police budgets and the amount of money that's being invested into ways of like controlling people and punishing people. And then we look at things like how much money is being spent on education, on community resources. And like there's, almost always like a really big disparity. And what we see in places where there is a lot of safety, a lot of security in communities, it's not places where they're spending a ton of money on police. It's places where people have resources, where the things that these communities are investing in are things like community infrastructure and centers that actually allow people to be more whole, allow people to have more support. And so, I mean, one of the things about defunding the police is that it's not just about, wanting to get rid of police because police do a lot of harm, although they do. But it's also about, hey, what could we do with that huge pot of money if we weren't spending it on guns and cop cars and overtime and all the things that police do.
Yeah. So I keep on hearing this reimagining, right? This reimagination in the abolition work is so important. And I think that just leads us really well to the content of the curriculum. How we talk about, not only, you guys have structured it in a way that shows how policing is not just about policing, how it intersects with so many part of our daily lives. And so I just wanted to ask you guys, I know it's really easy. The beautiful thing about this online curriculum that you guys have created is it's very, very clear. Anyone could really use it. There are videos in the beginning to help people know exactly what this is about. There are no surprises. But if possible, if all of you can kind of share, what are things that people really should not miss in your specific sections that you've helped to write? And I know it was a collaborative work in putting all of this together, but Chantal, I know that you have written a couple of sections. And so if you could just share with us, what are some really important parts of the curriculum that you'd like for us to really, really embrace as we are engaging in this curriculum?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sue. I just want to say, like, don't skip the introduction. Like, there's that video by Kimberly Crenshaw, her TED Talk about, how she coined the word intersectionality, and the framing of the values of like that we ground ourselves in to write this curriculum. I think that's a really good orientation for you. Like, so I think we come with lots of ideas about what words mean, and we did our best to really explain, like, these are the framings that we're putting this conversation in. This is not happening in a vacuum. So don't skip the introduction, I'll say that. And thinking about community safety, what I really was just being sparked by from hearing what Chris was saying was like, yeah, like we really want to figure out ways to, I think what the current model allows us just to respond to harm, and the other ends of that, like reducing harm. And then the other end after responding to harm is the repair part. And it's the like repair, it's like the reducing and the repair that don't get the service that it needs, or the time or the attention. And I think those are the things that get shortchanged when we cede our responsibility to each other to the state, right? And so from community safety, I really think about the practice of it, right? It's the practice of not just divesting from policing and not just trying to stoke our imagination for like what other world is possible, but like actually practicing it with each other. And knowing that that's going to be messy. And so for me, looking at like the pod mapping exercise in community safety, I think it allows us to think beyond siloed, like, okay, for me, I feel safe in this, and kind of think about what does that mean to apply that same parameter safety as a community, and like, who do we even name as people that make us feel safe? Or because what you'll find out is like, who I think would be somebody that's safe for me might actually be a problem for you, might actually put your safety in jeopardy. And so how do we even question what we name as safe and why we call it safe when it might actually be not safe for somebody else? And I think part of the pod map exercise allows us to flesh out like, who are safe people, what are the safe entities, and see how sometimes they're not shared. Oftentimes they're not shared. And so what does that mean for us about how we actually be responsible for keeping each other safe? Because truly it's about us taking responsibility to keep each other safe. And do we really believe that? I think the other part that I wanted to speak to is the SROs, so the school resource officers, and the use of them in schools. I'm talking about mythology, this belief that police and schools keep children safer. And there are so many first person stories in that section. People, parents specifically, and guardians and caretakers talking about their experience with police and how they try to like teach their kids about what it means to have schools, but also that like how much other things are not being funded because there's police in schools. And this is not a universal thing where police are expected to be in schools. It's a very certain kind of, I think, demographic that gets police in schools for very particular reasons. And I think trying to help us make the connection between SROs, police in schools, and the pipeline to prison, kind of how it starts from kindergarten. We get kids, a certain population of kids used to thinking about my future is either the prison or the plantation, right? That's my future. I'm being shaped to either function in a prison setting or a plantation, and how that really keeps feeding this monster that we have, and how we need to disrupt that starting in schools. Schools should be places of freedom and liberation for children, not places where we teach them how to be used to being encaged. So. I think I'm inviting Chris to go next.
Hi. So yeah, I think one of the things that's great about the curriculum, in part because it was written by multiple people, is that there's like different sorts of ways of getting this information, like whether that's through audio or video or reading things. I think especially the additional resources, if you're a person who really wants to dig in deep, I think there are definitely some nuggets there that basically were like, if we could make this like a 9-month thing, would have been able to go into depth in a lot more ways, in a lot more areas. So I mean, I think the hope that with this curriculum is that afterwards you will have an understanding of these different issues and how they relate to one another. But that there's a whole lot more out there that you can learn, that you can explore. You can sink your teeth into if you feel so led. Yeah, I don't know that I would say so much more. I do think that like it kind of speaks for itself, and that yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris and Chantel. I'm going to highlight a couple things from week 3 and then week 8 and or 9. Week 3, talking about the history of policing. One of the most important pieces in there that I would encourage y'all not to miss is the infographic that illustrates how police actually spend their time. And I think that's so powerful because when entering any discussion about public safety, we have to identify our preconceived notions and assumptions that we're bringing into the discussion. And one of those is just this, I think, culturally, societally held belief that police, their primary function is to respond to violent crime, right? If you've seen any number of police shows, Cops, Law and Order, SVU, NCIS, I mean, whatever you're watching, that is what they're doing all the time, right? But the data doesn't actually back that up. They looked at 3 different cities at a point in time, and they found that only 4% of the time were police responding to violent crime. That means 96% of the time they were doing other stuff that wasn't responding to violent crime, right? And so I think we have to really understand what we're talking about when we're talking about defunding police, abolishing police, replacing the functions of policing with different organizations that provide safety. We've got to look at what we're actually replacing. And so that infographic not only helps us calibrate what police do and don't do, but it helps you see kind of what proportion of the average cop's daily job is responding to violent crime versus traffic stops versus issuing citations, So I think that's really helpful. So that's the thing I would call out as the most important thing not to miss in week 3. And then secondarily in that week is just the video that talks about the history of policing and ties it back to its roots during slavery. Again, a link that a lot of folks in our modern culture, we don't make, that they're not teaching that in high school history classes. And so again, just understanding kind of where the seeds of modern day policing were planted, and that helps explain why it's grown into what it's grown into. So those are the things from week 3 that I would call out. And then looking at the week on political change, week 9, I'd say the section on Cointelpro. This was a government-sponsored attempt to surveil, discredit, and even harm activists and leaders in the civil rights movement and leaders in the Black liberation movement. And so understanding how that functioned, what leaders were affected, and then I think once you learn a little bit about it, you start to ask how it might still be functioning and in what ways the government might still be intentionally disrupting some of these movements and even violating civil rights to do so. So just kind of educating yourself on Cointelpro so you understand how policing and the government and these agencies have functioned as it relates to liberation movements, especially political movements. And then recognizing that that didn't just stop, in the 70s or 80s, it has continued and transformed. So that is, I think, what I would call out as the most important to note in that section on political change.
I wanted to lift up the section from the week on transformative justice, and I'm grateful for people in our church getting to have access to that movement, because I think, especially because I think one of the myths of abolition is that sort of it relies on a sort of utopian vision of, oh, well, people are just basically good. But transformative justice is actually a response to the realities of that we harm each other. That is, we're people and we're going to hurt each other. And so transformative justice offers up a way for us to see the connection between interpersonal harm and community harm, and to see that those are always interrelated to one another. And if you fix one without addressing the other, the harm still persists. And so in terms of transformative justice, we're asking that question: what needs to happen for interpersonal relationships to heal, but also to look at what happened around that harm to cause it to happen, so that we can stop that harm from happening again in the future by supporting, assisting, providing care for the person who also did the harming. And so it's recognizing that we are all caught up in cycles of violence that are interconnected with one another. The state's role is to come in and to stop interpersonal harm by protecting a certain vision of the state. It actually is not going to heal our communities to make them better or make them safer. Transformative justice is a form of transformation that makes possible that to happen in our world. For us to do it, and we can do it in our churches, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. Like, this is so practical. Like, this is a materialist curriculum. Like, this, you do this, like, you actually enact this. This isn't a lot of ideas up here. This is just like a life, like how we live our lives. And transformative justice gives us some of the tools for that. Also, we'll lift up this section on bail in prisons and say, I think that's a really helpful, because I think the whole purpose of prisons, of jails, is that it happens out of sight, right? It disappears people from our communities. And so unless you are somebody who is a victim of the system, unless you are a survivor of the system, then you don't really know what happens. And so this is sort of a chance for us to sort of say, actually, this is how bail works. We've got a lot of people in jail right now who are only there because they cannot afford to not be in jail. And you may get somebody who did just as harmful a crime. They got the money and they are out on the streets. And so we really want people to understand that this is an economic system. This is not, it is beyond just what we often hear, which is here to keep us safe, right? Like, this is actually a monetized system, a system that is connected to broader systems of capitalism that are all interconnected in how we have said this is the kind of world we want, and we need the state to protect it.
Thanks so much. Ben, can you kind of maybe finalize that last section where we talk about the next steps? I know there's a section that you guys have put together. I think Megan Raymer has helped to put that together, right? A directory so that people can, after they kind of go through this, can you tell us a little bit about that part of?
Absolutely. So in terms of the next steps section, we have provided additional activities and resources that you can utilize in order to follow up. As we said, this work is meant to just be an introduction, right? And so we imagine that as you engage with this work in your congregations, with your families, in your communities, you will find different pieces that jump out to you, that make you more curious. You'll find pieces that relate to immediate needs in your community or to the lives of people you know. And so we wanted to provide some other resources to you so that you can kind of follow the invitation of the Spirit as it moves in you while you're doing this. And so there are additional resources, there are additional activities to help you understand how to practically get engaged and to live this out, like Melissa was talking about. This is very much a lifestyle. And then finally, in addition to the toolkits and the resource page, there's a list of Mennonite congregations in the landscape of abolition. So these are congregations that are thinking about this work, talking about this work, saying, hey, we're committed to understanding how to do this. It's not so much these are the congregations that have all the answers, but it's people saying, hey, we are committing to be on this journey. And so that's helpful so that you know where to find other conversation partners, especially if you are in leadership, if you're clergy. You can reach out to these folks and just kind of dialogue with them, be in relationship with them. You might find that they're living and working in communities not too dissimilar from the communities that you're working with. And so we felt it was important to just to illustrate that there is actually already a network of Mennonite congregations on this journey with you. And so that you have some access to that in addition to the other resources that we provided. So you'll find all that in the next step section of the curriculum.
Thanks, Ben. And just to kind of also add that the directory there is not exhaustive. It's kind of like an invitation for other churches and congregations in the Mennonite landscape. If you want to be part of that or say, hey, we're already doing this kind of work and we want to also connect with other churches. I think MCUSA, we're trying to put together a form so that people can let us know and then you can be added to that directory. We're also kind of revamping that page so that it'll be more user-friendly, so that if there's like a button for, schools, I want to kind of get involved with SROs and schools, then they could click on that and they could see all the churches that are involved in that kind of work. And you can also kind of look at the location of the congregation and say, hey, that's not really that far from where we are. Maybe we can connect even in person when the pandemic is over, and just connect in multiple ways. So that's just an invitation. And so I'm just really grateful for that kind of the beginning that network for all of us. So thank you. I think this question is also for Ben. How can people use this curriculum? I know you've already kind of answered it in different ways, but if people have never ever talked about this in the church, is it accessible? If people have been doing this work for a while, is this too easy? Like how can people use this and how? Yeah, how can they do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share the thoughts that I have, and then again invite the other brilliant minds that are on this call that have done this work longer than I have to share as well. So I guess to answer those first two questions, it is accessible, whether this is day one of your thinking about abolition or it's day 3,762. Like it don't matter. You can still find access points into this curriculum. It's still going to provide useful information for you, whether you are learning or teaching yourself. So some very practical down-to-earth uses. This is something that you might use as a resource to study in your small groups, right? So you might unpack it in a small group, discuss it, and learn more. You might take it to your leadership team, to your elders, your trustees, lay leaders, and help engage in discussions about what the needs are in your community, and identify the resources in the curriculum to help you learn how to access those needs, or at least connect with the people that might help answer those questions, or even connect with the people that might help you know which questions to ask, because sometimes we don't even know what to ask, and it's important to recognize that. This might be something that you use as the basis of a sermon series. If you're feeling real bold, you could decide to preach through this, and so just utilize this as a basis for your theological exploration. Each week is embedded and founded in scripture, in biblical texts. And so you have text that you can play with, that you can wrestle with, that you can use to pull out the message of abolition that is already and has always been in the gospel narrative. And you can use it as a study guide for your own personal exploration and edification. So, if you are at a point where as a leader, lay or clergy, you feel like this might be important work, but you're not quite ready to pull, 5 or 10 of the folks in with you. You're not quite ready to start mobilizing the masses in your congregation. That is okay. You can still use this to deepen your knowledge, to deepen your understanding, and to find the access points that most call to you. Again, this is just like designed to be a pool that you can dip your toe into. It's not exhaustive. And we want to give you the flexibility to understand that while there are key things we think you want to make sure you don't miss, we did not by any means write this with the intention that you have to read every single word in here and go through it, linearly. Right? This is designed to be fluid, to respond to what meets your interest, to the needs that come up in your communities, like I keep mentioning. And so give yourselves the freedom and give the Spirit the freedom to sit with you in this and to start where you feel pulled, right? To let it pull you into it. And then as you begin to wrestle with it, you'll find the right connection points to draw others into the work as well. So those are some of the things that I call out as hows of using the curriculum. I wonder if there's anything others want to add.
So thorough.
So thorough is right.
So thorough. All the way thorough.
You gave me ideas that I didn't have, so those are super helpful. Thank you so much. And people can ask more. And those of you who are listening in, you could also, we welcome any questions that you might have. Feel free to kind of start filling up the Q&A. We do have some questions already that were emailed to us, and we will get to that before the live questions, but we also welcome them as well. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, all of you. We have some basic questions that have come, like, how much does it cost? Melissa, why don't you do some lightning speed answers of some of the things that people have asked?
How much does it cost? The curriculum is free and available on the Mennonite Church USA website, so you can access it there. And let me find
and another question that people had asked was, were police consulted in doing this abolition curriculum?
No, the police were not consulted in this curriculum, and the I thought about this question. We just our goal was not to provide two different sides of a debate, and to sort of provide two different sort of ways of looking at this question. This curriculum is rooted in our lived experience in abolition communities, and the hope and the promise of what those communities have offered us and those practices have offered us. But also, you don't need, if you don't really need something to know the side of pro-policing, because you live it every day. All of us, every single day, have been formed for a world where we are told from very early on, when the police come to visit our schools and kindergarten, that this is a necessary and part of our work, of our country, and it's unthinkable that there could be something outside of this. So we don't really feel like there are a lot of people who need at this point to understand better the policing side. You have access to that every day.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Another question that came in was, why was defund the chosen word over reform?
Chris, you leaning into this one? Yeah.
I see her leaning.
Defund the police is the popular demand from the streets, especially after the murder of George Floyd, when hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world were calling for something different. Specifically, defunding the police is it's an abolitionist demand, as opposed to a reformist demand. Reformist demands might change things about how policing looks, but they don't actually take away the power, take away the resources of police, and therefore oftentimes they actually end up making the police stronger things like body cameras, things like civilian review boards. These things actually might make it seem like police, like there is some sort of oversight, like there is some sort of accountability, and also like these things might actually reduce the harm of policing. But actually, we've seen with lots of studies and with history, especially over the past month or so, year or so, that these things actually don't result in the police killing fewer people. And defunding the police, actually taking away their resources, especially if we're putting those resources into things that our communities actually need. That's something that actually gets us closer to the world that we want.
Thank you, Chris. Amy Epp has asked, I'm wondering if the curriculum in its current form would be appropriate to use with youth or adaptable for that purpose. What do you guys think?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm playing. Yeah, absolutely. As someone who spent years working with MYF and JYF youth, they are capable of understanding, processing, and handling so much more than we assume that they are. And this curriculum is definitely written in such a way that you can use it to engage with them. I don't think there are any concepts in here that, especially high school aged youth, just aren't going to be able to understand or comprehend. So I would say, yes, feel free to adapt it as you think you may or may not need, depending upon the context that you live in, the community that you live in, your youth. But by and large, yeah, go for it.
And I like to add that I think our youth are more in tune with this movement than some of us, our older folks, might be. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that you should start earlier. I have elementary age school kids, and they are capable and are having conversations about policing and safety and what does defunding mean around our dinner table. So I think you can pick the parts that feel like most accessible for your kids or things they're asking questions about, and really use these as guiding to develop guideline questions to talk about, to have these conversations about it. Because what happens is if you don't talk about it, then you're essentially saying all they need to know, which is that this has nothing, that this doesn't mean a conversation that matters to you or the way you live your life, when in fact that's not true. So I think normalizing having conversations about safety, community safety, and the police is important to start as soon as you can. So, because the other narrative, as Melissa said, is already out there, and it starts from kindergarten or before that.
Amen. Joel Beachy has written, I wonder how to help translate, quote, translate defund the police into terms that are understandable to some of our members. If I attempt to do so, am I diminishing the effectiveness and the point of the movement to defund the police? My point is to create understanding and buy-in, but I do not want to do that at the cost of watering down the message. Thank you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a shot at that one. Yeah, Joel, I think I really appreciate that. I think we went through a season where a lot of people were saying, oh, defund doesn't really mean defund. Miriam Akaba very kindly wrote a op-ed in the New York Times for you. Defund the police actually means defund the police. So I really do appreciate that awareness of not wanting to water down that message. And I think, I'm just guessing, Joel's coming from Mennonite community. For our community, this shouldn't be this should not be difficult for us. We try to defund the military all the time. We have a history of not paying the war tax. We have a peace tax fund right now that's been supported. We have an anti-militarization campaign happening right now in our church. This is a form. If the military polices the world, the police system here polices us every day. This is a domestic and an international form of the same kind of state violence. And so for Mennonites, this is just a hop, skip, and a jump from our pre-existing conviction that Jesus Christ is Lord. We can have no allegiances to the state. that require us to kill in the name of the state because we love our enemies even unto death. So I really do think that we are set up for this in the Mennonite Church, making some of these connections in that way.
Melissa, anybody else want to respond to that? Or go ahead.
Just briefly, I would say where you start might be important, right? And so maybe you want to linger a little bit more on the introduction and that week 2 definition of safety, right? I think this question of what is and isn't safe and for whom is or isn't it safe is a really easy way to get anyone to begin to engage with this curriculum. And so I'd say it may not be as much about translating, but just about knowing your people enough to know where you linger and where you place emphasis.
Thanks. Okay, the next question comes from Keith Flaming, and it's interesting. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 to 17. There is a passage on the submission to authority that has been named, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be an emperor, supreme governor sent by, you guys could all look at that submission to authority passage. And so he says, how do we reconcile our positions as Mennonites with the human institutions we are called to be subject to under the laws enforced by the state? Is defunding the police a form of retaliation that claims rights as something we deserve? Do we have rights as Christians that need to be defended at all costs? If so, is it not that sanctioned violence as well? And so, yeah, like kind of help us to engage. If the sentence is a lot longer, I can't read all of it, but help us to engage when somebody comes up, like somebody has these scripture and they say, and this is one that's commonly, I think, quoted, right? Shouldn't we submit to the institution? Isn't that what the scripture says? How do we respond to that?
I can start. My first thought is that I don't know any individual Christian that holds an immovable line when it comes to the belief that we have to submit to authority. Specifically speaking, if we look back not that long ago, there was a system of political authority that made it completely legal to buy and sell human beings, to punish human beings, even to kill human beings, so long as it benefited a specific group of people that were in power, so long as it benefited our economy. Right. And there were Christians at the time that made that same argument that, hey, we can't challenge the system because we have to submit to authority. However, there are other narratives in the text, in the gospel, in the Bible that many of us read week in and week out that speak about liberation. And as a person of color, this idea of liberation, which is not just an eternal heavenly concept, but a concept about the here and now, is embedded in how I understand the divine and how I understand God. And so I believe there's an even weightier argument in the biblical text for a God who believes in our literal physical redemption and liberation in the here and now. And so there are hard limits on what it means to submit to authority. To submit to authority to the point at which you accept your own denigration, your own assumption of inhumanity, or the death of you, your children, the people you love, I think is really to accept a denigration of the divine that is within you, the divine that you represent day in and day out. And so it's actually an act against God. So I'll just drop that nugget in there as like the way that I would attempt to begin to wrestle with those passages of scripture in light of the different lived experiences that many of us have.
Yeah, Ben, I'll just add to that. Actually, also in that 2 Peter passage it says, "Slaves, submit to your masters." So I think we are dealing with cultural context, but these were actually also passages that were brought against Anabaptists in the 16th century. Menno Simons quotes this passage that we just heard Sue read from the questions as he's defending the right of the early Anabaptists to baptize one another. And so really deep in our history was this, you know, our spiritual forebears also were firmly going against the state church of their day, and refusing to obey the state violence of the magistrates as it came up in all of these different ways, and they were killed for that. That's also the legacy that we carry with us.
That's really helpful, Melissa, to remind us of our history. Yeah, here's some live questions that I'll be taking. And some of them I think we've already answered, so I'll try to kind of pass those. Let me go. Sorry about that. Scroll is not going down. There we go. Is there an estimate of how long each section would take if I were to go through the curriculum with a small group of people? Should I schedule like an hour or 2 hours? That's a simple one to answer maybe.
I think when we were writing it, we tried to think about like a traditional adult ed hour at a faith community, at a church. But it just really depends upon your context. I think some people really want to wrestle and ask deeper questions. But I think we try to think about the flow within a traditional, I hate to say the word traditional, in a Christian ed hour at a congregation. But I definitely think there could be people, I would say, do a smooth 90 minutes just to be safe. But this is really up to you in the spirit. You know, you let the spirit have the spirit's way, you might be there for 2 hours, depending upon your context.
Oh, no. Or 18 weeks, right? Here's a question from Linda Peachy. I'm intrigued by the emphasis on all of us assuming responsibility for the safety of our communities rather than ceding that responsibility to the state. Many aspects of our society are highly individualistic in orientation. Does the idea of assuming responsibility for our communities require a little bit of a cultural shift? And is that addressed in the curriculum?
I definitely think it requires a cultural shift. Yeah, I think so much of our society is super individualistic, very much about like how we can take care of ourselves, take care of the people that we like are sort of like in our immediate circle. I think Chantel was talking about earlier, pod mapping. One of the things that also helps us do is sort of like think through who our community actually is. You know, we think about our community, you think about the people who are around us. And, you know, a lot of us might feel like we have really strong and broad communities, but when we actually need something, we actually have to turn to people for support. Do we actually have the relationships where that's something that we can do? And part of what pod mapping does is like actually challenge us to have those conversations with people and to really, you know, sort of challenge those relationships to be not just something that's like, you know, yeah, I know these people, I have these people in my life, but to really be like, hey, if I needed something, or hey, I need something, are you actually there for me? And also, you know, to be able to offer that to other people.
Yeah, definitely a cultural shift for sure. Thank you, Chris. Maybe this will go to you, Melissa. Is the transformative justice section tied to restorative justice practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think one of the sort of ways that we can think about restorative justice as that interpersonal repair. How do we? But I think one of the ways that abolitionists have spoken into restorative justice is say, you and me, this harm was done. Let's figure out what the harm. How do we make reparation? How does that lead us towards a path of healing? So that's between you and me. But what caused that harm to happen in the first place? So it's sort of like, if I think a good way to think about it is restorative justice is a practice that happens between people or within a community. This is actually looking at like a much broader picture. It's sort of like zooming out to say, oh, wow, this person lives under food apartheid, and this person doesn't have access to mental health services, and so if we're ever going to actually change this, the stealing that happened here, then we actually need to think about how do we give you access to the things that you need? How do we change this community so that harm isn't perpetuated in the exact same ways in the future, instead of just punishing people, which is what we do. We want to punish people and move on. This is a much more, this takes time, energy, money, resources. It's not, punishment is quick and dirty, and it's over. Yeah, but this actually heals things.
One of the other things about transformative justice is that it was really created and disseminated by people who couldn't turn to the state to help them deal with harm, to help them respond to harm. People who were sex workers, people who were undocumented, so people who hadn't have a real distrust of the state, because if they turn to the state for these different things, supposedly for safety, could actually put them in harm's way.
Thanks. We have so many questions just coming in, which is great. I don't know if we'll be able to get through them all, but we'll try. 2 questions from Sally Holmes. Our church is divided on defund, reinvest. Any suggestions how to bridge that divide? What do you do? And this is probably a really good question of the realities of a lot of churches. And who should lead such a course at a church? Trained outsiders or people of color? Another great question.
Can you repeat the first question, Sue?
Yeah, so our church is divided on this defunding the police and reinvesting. Any suggestions on how to bridge that divide? What do you do when your church is divided on this work of abolition? Some people think it's a great idea, and some people are like, how do you do that? Melissa, go ahead.
I was just gonna say on the first point, I don't know about in MCUSA, if churches are divided on this issue. I think I am a Christian. I am not a Mennonite, and I would say other churches, yes, definitely. There definitely is often a resistance to defund, especially that word, that idea, which is a longer conversation about the resources that are available to especially urban communities, under-resourced communities. If the only thing that the state is willing to invest in their community is the police, I think that it's logical to view defunding the police as losing the only thing that the state is giving you, is giving your community. So yes, but I don't know about here.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything that your entire, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but our people are all over the place on all sorts of things. I hope that what we are cultivating is an openness to the Holy Spirit's movement among us. And this is a curriculum that provides first space for that discernment together. So we really did, Ben talked about this a bit, but anywhere you are on this journey, whether you have never heard or you've heard this on the news once and it made you very anxious, this curriculum is for you. If you are somebody who's been thinking about this forever and ready to go, this curriculum is for you. But the other thing I would say is something that has been really transformative for me in the past 2 years is remembering that abolition is everywhere. So we can actually begin these practices in our daily life, even if you cannot get your church to go to city council and demand cutting police funding in half. Abolition starts at home. It's a way that we relate to one another. It's our refusal to let the worst thing someone has ever done be the thing that defines them. It's a refusal to take the easy way out and decide not to hold people accountable, right? Like, we can actually do abolition every day. It's a set of actions that we collect over time. And so we can be doing this, even if you can't get a congregation on board. Do it at home, do it in your life.
Absolutely. This is probably a simple question, so we'll do some hard, easy. Is the curriculum tailored so much to Mennonite context that it couldn't be used among several community churches? How about use for non-faith groups, community groups?
I don't think this is as exclusively Mennonite Anabaptist curriculum at all. I mean, one of our writers is not Mennonite. As far as like outside of a faith context, there is intentionally quite a bit of like biblical text as a grounding, but I think that you could, I feel like you could supplement other sacred text in if you wanted to for that portion. I think we do a lot of thinking about being embodied and present, listening to story, and I feel like that can be something that transcends a non-faith, like into a non-faith context. So I think it's fairly accessible and adaptable. Is that the word I'm looking for? That's the word. So that's my take, y'all. The rest of y'all agree, or what you think?
I mean, I would say sure, but that there are also a lot of other resources out there that aren't faith-based at all, that might make more sense in like a non-faith context.
Right. So this is
the real. Yeah.
This is really helpful for faith communities, right? And I think we kind of focus on the Anabaptist perspective so that people know kind of where we're coming from, but it's not only for Mennonites or Anabaptists. Can I say that?
That sounds good. That sounds good. But if it speaks to you,
there you go. That's right. There's these, and this comes again every day. There are just a few bad apples is becoming a chorus. What is a good response to someone who clearly has their defenses up?
Like, don't throw out the bushel for the few bad apples. Is that what we're saying? Hey, y'all, I'm definitely on a call.
Can I say hi?
No, it's not that kind of
Can I
call,
just
baby.
wait?
No, it's not that kind of call, honey. It's not that kind of call.
See, it's everyday practical hands-on abolition work that we do.
Listen, I'm
Your
practicing
children.
abolition right now with my children.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I think part of the some people are definitely going to have their hackles up when you're talking about things like defunding the police for lots of different reasons. I think one of the ways in which the bad apple argument fails is just that, like, policing, even when it works well, isn't actually getting us more safety. Like in the, like Ben was talking about with like what police actually do with their time. Like, even if we're looking at things like the homicide clearance rate, like there definitely are some cops who are worse than others. There are definitely some cops who if cops kill 1,000 people a year, we know that there are a lot of cops who aren't killing people, but that there are still these problems in policing as an institution that go beyond these specific acts of harm, and sort of just pervade our communities, especially low-income communities, especially Black and Brown communities.
And I would say if you feel just like being literal and being a smart aleck, if you got a tree that is producing fruit and you never know when you bite into that fruit if it's going to poison you or sustain you, like, how many random chances of being poisoned are you willing to take before you just cut the tree down? And I think we've been able to watch the tree for long enough that it's time we stop taking that risk. It's not worth it. So that would be my kind of tongue-in-cheek response.
Thanks. I'm also hearing from a lot of the comments. Thank you. We also have a lot of, I see people who are Catholic who have, told us that they really appreciate this. Lots of affirmation. Let's see. I understand the violent crimes are a small percentage of incidents that police are called to do. How might an abolition proposed communities deal with grievous wrongs like assault, murder, sexual abuse?
I think that one of the big things that's really hard for people to, that like most people I think just don't know, and then I think it's like hard for people to sit with even if they do know, is that police, even in those cases of really serious harm, usually don't catch the person who committed that harm. Usually that person is not in prison. And so I think we're sort of like, like lured in by this idea that these things, police, prisons, keep us safe, at least because we put the bad people in there. When actually most of the time that's not what happens. Even if that does happen in some instances, most people come home at some point. And so really what we have is a system where we, in the best case scenario, are punishing people, but aren't actually trying to rehabilitate people, aren't actually trying to heal people who've been harmed, and aren't really paying attention at all to the many people who have been harmed, to the many people who have committed harm who aren't caught up in this system. I think one of the things that abolition really strives for is for our communities to be more whole, for all of us as individuals to be more whole, for people to actually be able to access healing, and for people who've committed harm to not just be thrown away, but to really look at, what does it mean that we have communities where, in Philadelphia, where the homicide rate last year was almost 500, we can look at putting all those people in prison, but how does that actually prevent this harm? And I think that it actually doesn't, and that's really what we have to grapple with and what we really have to attack.
Wow, thanks, Chris. I think these will be probably my last question here. This is great. Is there a possibility that there'll be a version in different languages in the future? We might, we're exploring ways that we could translate this into Spanish. Because there's been actually Mennonite World Conference has requested if this was in Spanish. And so we'll be exploring that option. And when they are ready, we will definitely let you know. I just want to give all of you panelists maybe a sentence or a thought or something that you guys wanted to share as we wrap up our time. An hour and 15 minutes just flew by, and wanted to thank you, but also give you the last word. I see Chantel, Melissa, Ben, and Chris as in my little window, so you can go in that order. Chantel, I'm always putting you on the spot first.
Did you say my name first?
Yes.
Yeah, bless God. Bless God. It's good to be first. And I could say, and everybody else can say something even more brilliant. No, I am so thankful that this is in the world. I'm even more thankful that people are taking this, that people apparently are and have been taking this seriously, that this feels relevant and people are ready to grapple and wrestle with that. And I think more than grapple and wrestle, I think alongside of grappling and wrestling, ready to take action because they really believe another world is possible. So that just makes me feel hopeful.
Yeah, I'll just share that abolition taught me the gospel. I think this was the first time that I really understood what it meant that to worship a God who desires redemption for creation rather than punishment and destruction. And so I hope, abolition taught me to love Jesus more, and I hope it will do that for you too.
I would just send out a reminder to folks that it's easy to think about this along ideological lines and to make this a thought exercise, but at its most fundamental, at its core, this is about people. This is about stories, it's about lives. And so center the people that are affected by this broken system day in and day out. And when you feel the tendency to make it ideological or to get in your head about it, bring yourself back to the stories, bring yourself back to the people that have been lost, that have been forever changed, the families that have been affected. We've got to keep the people center. That's how we keep God center as well, I think.
It's hard in general for me to be brief, especially when I'm talking about abolition. So I will just say
Chris, you got the
that,
last word. Take all the time you need.
I mean, I think the longer thing I was gonna say is about like this conflation of like justice and punishment and accountability, and that like actually these are like very, very different things. And like Melissa was saying a little bit earlier about like punishment being something that you do to someone. One of the things about accountability is that it requires consent. And I think in the best moments of all of our lives, we do want to be accountable. Whether we want to be accountable to the people closest to us, to our communities, that part of abolition is like really is like wanting to be accountable, and part of that is like, we do all make mistakes, we do all fall short of like what we aspire to do. But like part of accountability is like learning and growing and being seen, becoming better. And so yeah, that was the longer thing I was gonna say, and I'm gonna stop now.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, team. Thank you, everyone who has stayed on for this long webinar. This is recorded and it will be sent to you as well so that you can kind of ponder this or use this as a resource as you are also using the curriculum. I think it's on the chat or somewhere in the universe in our webinars world here, a link to our curriculum. Some of you guys have asked how you can donate. We would love donations so that we can create more curriculum like this. But it is free. But if you are inclined to donate to MCUSA, there should also be a link on the first page when you come on the curriculum. So we pray that God will continue to use these resources to extend and expand the gospel in your area. God be with you, and we will see you the next time that we have another wonderful conversation. Thank you, Chantal, Melissa, Ben, Chris, and the tech support team for making this possible. Go in peace.